Hey, Sandhurst family, thanks for joining us. Today we get to finish up 1 Corinthians 7. It's on marriage, it's on singleness, it's on divorce, and today we're going to be talking about a couple things with Adam. We're going to be talking about what are some things that he wished he could have included in the sermon, but didn't have time to. We're going to go about all the way back to Genesis 1 and 2, and we're also going to talk about some stereotypes. How does 1 Corinthians 7 slap some stereotypes that are common among singlehood in the church? And then last, we're going to look at just a biblical perspective on having undistracted devotion to the Lord, because that's Paul's goal for 1 Corinthians 7. So before we jump in, a few shout outs first. If you were at church on Sunday, we had a little bit of a health thing with our own Ken Welch. Had some chest pains, ambulance came, and he spent the night in the hospital, but he's good and should be released today. So shout out to Ken. Yep. Also, we're Missions Church, and we got a team in Peru. So shout out to our team in Peru. But that's the point of this podcast, is to help us think biblically about God, life, and culture. We've been in 1 Corinthians 7. And so similar to last week, I just want to start with the text because we're a Bible church. And then we're going to go from there and answer some questions. All right. So before I read the verses, Adam, you taught these verses on Sunday. Tell us, for the verses that you taught, what's kind of the main emphasis? What's the point that Paul is trying to make?
Right. So Paul is trying to answer the question here. Now that I've come to Christ, now that I've come to faith in God through Jesus Christ, and I have this new God, if you will, does that mean I need to change my marital status? If I'm single, do I need to get married? If I'm married, do I need to get divorced? And how does that impact my marriage life? And so he gives several examples to illustrate where he lands on the nature of marriage and what after faith in Christ.
Okay, so that's the question. What's the answer?
The answer is no. You don't need to change. You bloom where you're planted. You stay. You keep in your lane. And there's the verse, is essentially abide in the direction God has given you.
Okay. All right. So if you have a little thing in your house that says bloom where you're planted,
right,
and you wanted to put some verses on it,
yep,
you could put 1 Corinthians chapter 7,
that's right,
verses 17 to 34.
That's it.
All right.
Yep.
I'm going to read them. We know the point, and then we'll go from there. All right. 1 Corinthians 7, I'm going to read 17 through 34. Only as the Lord has assigned to each one, as God has called each, in this manner let him walk. And so I directed in all the churches. Was any man called when he was already circumcised? He's not to become uncircumcised. Has anyone been called in uncircumcision? He's not to become circumcised. Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing. But what matters is the keeping of the commandments of God. Each man must remain in that condition in which he was called. Were you called while a slave? Don't worry about it. But if you're able to also become free, rather do that. For he who is called in the Lord while a slave is the Lord's freedman. Likewise, he who is called while free is Christ's slave. You were bought with a price. He says that in chapter 6 as well. Do not become slaves of men. Brethren, each one is to remain with God in that condition in which he was called. Now concerning virgins, I have no command of the Lord, but I give an opinion as one who by the mercy of the Lord is trustworthy. I think then that it is good in view of the present distress, that it is good for a man to remain as he is. Are you bound to a wife? Don't seek to be released. Are you released from a wife? Do not seek a wife. But if you marry, you've not sinned, and if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. Yet such will have trouble in this life, and I'm trying to spare you. But this I say, brethren, the time has been shortened, so that from now on, those who have wives should be as though they had none, and those who weep as though they did not weep, and those who rejoice as though they did not rejoice, and those who buy as though they did not possess, and those who use the world as though they did not make full use of it. For the form of this world is passing away. Last verses. But I want you to be free from concern. One who is unmarried is concerned about the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But one who is married is concerned about the things of the world, how he may please his wife. And his interests are divided. The woman who is unmarried and the virgin is concerned about the things of the Lord, that she may be holy, both in body and spirit. But one who is married is concerned about the things of the world, how she may please her husband. This I say for your own benefit, not to put a restraint upon you, but to promote what is appropriate and to secure undistracted devotion to the Lord. Okay, so that's a mouthful. And you're saying, okay, the point is here, bloom where you're planted.
Yep.
And before we jump into questions, one thing that I wanted to just make sure that we're clear on from this is that bloom where you're planted is not like a vague sort of thriving, but to use Paul's words, the blooming that he wants to see in the church, the blooming that God wants to see in his church is a blooming, in his words, undistracted devotion to the Lord.
Yes.
So when we say bloom where you're planted, we're not just saying like, oh, just kind of find some vague satisfaction. Here's the blooming.
Yeah.
Undistracted devotion to the Lord. So the topic in chapter 7, marriage, singleness, divorce.
Right.
The goal for chapter 7 is he wants to secure undistracted devotion to the Lord. That's the goal. All right, so kind of that's framework for chapter 7. You just did a sermon on it. Tell us some things that maybe you found interesting or compelling in your study, but didn't make it in the sermon.
Well, one thing is that for Paul, at first glance, it may seem that he has a really low view of marriage, like, that almost elevates singlehood. And there's this debate, like, did Paul prefer everyone be single? And I don't think he did, because if he did, the church would die out in one generation. So I don't think he planned. And earlier in the chapter, he says, don't defraud each other. He says, stay married and bless your spouse. And notice when he says, what I'm trying to do is have you, he said, have undivided devotion to the Lord. Earlier in that paragraph, he says your interests are. Notice he doesn't say to the married person that their heart is divided. He says their interests are divided. So he's not saying that your heart is divided between God and man if you're married. He's saying your interests are divided, and what I'm hoping is that it will help you have an undivided devotion to God, to have undivided interests before God, and we all know that's true. That to have fewer concerns around marriage and family. When I had as a single man, I had one cell phone plan. Now I have 5. And so there's just things that come with marriage and family that divide our interests and require our time. And so Paul's saying, look, I want to help you remain focused on and make it easier for you to have an undivided heart.
Okay, so you're saying an undivided heart is not the same as undivided interests.
Correct, yeah.
And give me 1 or 2 more examples of that. Just help me sort that out in my brain.
Right. So a divided heart would be like, is it kind of in some ways it's a right and wrong. It's like, do I have idols that compete with God? And he's saying, look, I want to help you have undivided devotion to the Lord. I want to help you live in a way with undivided interests that help you have undivided heart. To have divided interests, again, it's just now, again, as a single man, I had 1 car. Now I think we have 4 or 5 in the driveway. And just the multiplying of people in the house that are legally and financially and spiritually attached to you that you're responsible for multiplies the cares that you have and the maintenance that you have to do on the things that are passing, as he describes. And so and there's those clutch verses, 29 to 31, where he just says, if you're married, live as not, and if you're mourning, as if not, and happy as if not, and have something as if not. And it's kind of this as if not life. He's saying, look, the time is short. Let's live in a way that reflects eternal values. And so it's really hard as the people around you multiply, for whom you take care and responsibility, to maintain focus on eternal things, because there's so many things, doctor's appointments and bills to pay and school homework and trips and what, that stuff, it becomes those interests can compete in our hearts as idols, and we have to fight more battles in our hearts to avoid idolatry.
Okay, so the topic, marriage, singleness, divorce. The goal, undistracted devotion to the Lord. And so the point that he's making, and I just want to try to summarize what you're saying, or maybe say it in my own words. What he's trying to do, the case that he's making is, as he wants us to have undistracted devotion to the Lord, he's just recognizing the reality that marriage, in particular, for what he's talking about, brings in more interests that are going to create that have the capacity to create greater concern.
Mm-hmm.
So you're probably going to talk about like this current distress,
Right.
but he's going, I want you to have undistracted devotion to the Lord. And the more things that are part of your life that you really love and care about in a God honoring way, the more concerns you're going to have. So if this distress, and I don't know what your thought is on that, but if let's just say it's persecution, then a married man who has kids is going to have greater concern with that persecution if he has a wife and kids that are part of that suffering than he is by himself. So.
Yeah, I mean, even Jesus himself said something to this effect in Matthew. You know how hard it will be for pregnant and nursing mothers in that day when the calamity, when the parousia comes, when the second coming and the tribulation happens, because it'll just be a difficult time to live through. And so, what Paul is saying is, I would love for you not to have to fight more battles. Let's kind of clear the path for you to be able to give yourself fully to the Lord and to His people.
All right. So, anything from your study that you want to highlight? Anything else that's like, man, I didn't get a chance to talk about this, but I wanted to.
Yeah, I think there are two things that stick out. One was when Paul is saying that he wishes, for example, that all people were as he is, or is it the same thing when in Genesis 1 when God created marriage and said it is not good for man to be alone? Is that the same thing as it is not good for man to be single? Did God create marriage in order for people? Because what Paul is saying here is, I wish I think you'll be better. You will, because it is good for you to remain as you are. Are you married? Don't seek a divorce. But if you're unmarried, don't look for a wife. In other words, it's good to be alone, right? And so, is he contradicting God in this? And it was a question to my mind when God said in Genesis 1, it is not good for a man to be alone. Is he saying that it is not good for a human to be single? And I had to go back and do that reading, and I came to the conclusion that if you actually read the text in Genesis 1 and 2, it's very clear what God was doing there. When he created Adam and Eve, no suitable helper was found for Adam. And it doesn't say, and so he created Eve, and now they had sex, or now they had a family, or now they had a marriage, or now they had a white picket fence, and it's not that God created this helper for Adam, and then they became, the goal was marriage. The goal was that they would help one another, that she would help him rule the world and rule the earth. That God said, okay, now go and rule over the creation and be my vice regents in the world and represent me to creation, right? And take care of creation. And so the reason that God created Eve as a helper, and that word etzer is used in the Old Testament as a noun only for two things, Eve and God, that's it. But the verb, the atzer, A-Z-E-R, is used many times for a lot of things. It's used in Joshua chapter 1 when it says, okay, you tribes, you're going to have to come over and help your brethren, take the land. And so the idea of help or helping in the Old Testament is it's a broader term. And so it was interesting to me to think, okay, when a lot of marriage conferences will open up, it's not good for man to be alone. And I can attest in my own life, man, when Heather departs for a trip or something, it's like barbarianism comes in immediately. And it's like Lord of the Flies, and there's a pig's head out there in 24 hours. But for us, I think for a single person, when they read that verse, they can fulfill that verse through koinonia. I think that men and women in koinonia and fellowship can fulfill the Genesis 1 and 2 mandate to rule over creation, if you will, and to represent God to the world. So I had to kind of reconcile what Paul was saying. Hey, it's good to be single with Genesis 1 and 2. It's not good for man to be alone, but it doesn't say it's not good for man to be single. So that was an interesting thing for me, and I don't know if you have any thoughts about that text and those texts.
Typically, we would say that the wife was given to the husband as his helper, not so much woman to the man, but the husband or the wife to the husband. So, are you saying the woman to the man, not the husband to the
well, I guess
wife to the husband?
Well, it's like when God said, "Let us make man in our image." What was He trying to do? Was He trying to create marriages and families, or was He trying to create? Let us make man in our image and our likeness, and let them be a family. No, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the livestock, and all the creatures that move along the ground. And so God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him, male and female, He created them. And God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth." Now that requires
sounds like marriage.
That part is marriage, yes. And subdue it, rule over it, the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and over everything. So the main thing that man did was rule in God's stead, right? We are the vice regents of God on earth. And so marriage is a part of that because marriage is the foundation of family. That yes, a wife is given to a husband, as Jesus himself said. In the beginning, it was not so. God said, made the male and female, and what God has joined together, let not man separate. But I do think that the Genesis 1 mandate can be fulfilled in koinonia. And marriage per se is really more addressed, because I think that Genesis 1 addresses man-woman fellowship, but Genesis 2 more addresses marriage. When God puts Adam to sleep, makes the woman out of the rib, brings her to the man. This is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. This is Genesis 2. For this reason, a man will leave his father and his mother and be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh. And so there, I feel like we have, humanity created in chapter 1, and we have this marriage, if you will, demonstrated or taught in chapter 2. But I think that marriage, that sacredness in a marriage between a husband and a wife was part of the fulfillment of the etzer, the help, but not the whole. There is still room in God's creation for number one, for it's not good for man to be alone. It doesn't mean it's not good for a man to be single. I don't think those two are equivalent.
All right. All right. So anything else related to the sermon that you wanted to highlight? Or that wasn't in the sermon?
Right. One last thing was this idea of this present crisis, because to me that was a big deal. And he says this in verse 26. He says, backing up to 25, about virgins I've got no command from the Lord, but I give a judgment who is won by the Lord's mercy is trustworthy. Verse 26, because of the present crisis, I think it's good for you to remain as you are. In other words, because of this present crisis, I think it's good to remain single, and it will help you in your life not to pursue marriage. And so the question is the present crisis something that was happening in Corinth, like a particular famine, or was it persecution or something happening in Corinth or the Roman Empire? Was it, when he says this present crisis, did he mean like that Jesus is coming back any moment? And so we should not give any margin of our lives to marriage, to kids, to sports, to art, because Jesus is coming back any moment. I remember having this idea when I was in high school, like, I don't need to go to college. Jesus is coming back. I just need to share Jesus with people. And then my pastor, who was in his 50s, said, Adam, I used to think the same thing when I was your age, and I decided I would go to college. But I mean, so is the present crisis, something happening in Corinth? Is it something that was sort of unique to them, that Jesus coming back? Was Paul wrong? And I don't think any of those answers really for the text. And unfortunately, when I dug down, and I couldn't bring this into the sermon, but when I drilled down on it, the word crisis, I think, is an unfortunate translation. Do you have that word? Do you have translation?
Distress.
Distress, okay. So I think the better word for that, to reflect the Greek, is just kind of a pressure or a tension in the nature of things, the way things are. And I think a better translation would have been, because of the pressure in the life that we have, the way the difficulties of life, and it does say present, because of the present pressure of the way things are. And I think when he says present, he's meaning essentially, when Jesus left, he said, "I'm coming back soon," right? And I don't think Paul thought, okay, it's at any moment. There's two verses that Paul indicates about the return of Jesus. One, he says, we who are alive will be caught up in the air. So people think, oh, he thinks he'll be alive. But then in chapter 6 here, he says, we who are dead will be raised first. So those kind of negate. And so I don't think from the text you can argue Paul thought Jesus was coming back any moment. But Jesus did clearly teach he was coming back soon. And that was the next thing that would happen. There were no other events that needed to happen. There was no more John the Baptist, no more other preparatory things. Jesus said, just be ready. And so I think Paul was instructing them to help you be ready at any moment. It will help you to be single and have fewer interests. And so that helped me to say, okay, he wasn't misguided thinking Jesus was literally flying back through the clouds any moment, nor was he talking about something specific to Corinth. And actually, in the next letter, I mean, there was no persecution particular in that moment. They were actually pretty fat and happy, and he asks them to give to other churches. So the ideas in the next paragraph about live as if not really are generated out of Jesus is coming. He's coming on his own time. Be ready at any moment. That's the idea of bloom where you're planted. Stay in your lane. You can change lanes if you want to get remarried, get remarried. Or if you want to get married, get married. But if you want to, it would help you to be ready at any moment, not to have more troubles than you need.
Cool. Got it. All right. So, in terms of 1 Corinthians 7, the topic is marriage, it's divorce, it's singleness. Bloom where you're planted. Some are given the gift of marriage, and some are given the gift of singleness. Trying to think about if you are, say, planted in singleness,
right.
and Paul is saying, bloom in singleness.
Right.
Secure undistracted devotion to the Lord in singleness. What would you say are some cultural stereotypes around singleness that 1 Corinthians 7 would help address and inform? Because actually, I was looking up some statistics from Barna, and if you look at the average age of men and women in their first marriage between 1950 and now, I thought this was interesting. 1950 average age for a man in his first marriage, 22.8 years old, and for a woman, 20.3 years old. That's 1950. And then, now in the year 2025, the average age for a man in his first marriage, 30.2 years old, and a woman, 28.6. So 8 years delayed marriage on average now compared, which means we have more people in our churches that are planted, gifted, singleness at least for longer than in 1950. And I think to not acknowledge that is to kind of miss where our people are at. And there can be some stereotypes around singleness that 1 Corinthians 7 and the rest of Scripture is going to help maybe address and call out and clarify. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think the first thing I wanted to say was address the word gift. Because a lot of times people think, okay, I'm single, but I don't think I have that gift. And that's not what Paul's saying. The gift of singlehood or marriage, which he says in verse 7 that they're both a gift. He's not saying that they're this thing that you have. They're not saying a skill that you're good at. What he's saying is it's an opportunity to engage. So singlehood or marriage, in whichever state you find yourself, that's God's gift to you to grow you and then to give yourself back to him and to help you love God and people. So you can do that as a single person. You can do that as a married person. They're both a gift. They both have opportunities. They both have challenges. So I was speaking with Joe Nell, who shared in the equipping hour a week ago, and he said, "Look, I'm an older man. I'm a bachelor. I'm a lifetime bachelor, but my gift of singlehood doesn't mean that I just love being single, and I just I'd love to be married someday." And so I just want to say that there are a lot of single folks that if you're single, you have that gift. It doesn't mean that you have to keep it your whole life, and you may have a desire to be married. So
the gift of singleness may not be a permanent gift.
No. Well, no. And then you would have the gift of marriage. Yeah. And so that's important because I think people think, well, I don't want to say I have the gift of singlehood because God might stick me here and think I like this. We all deal with tensions in our hearts in whichever state we're in.
I think in terms of singleness, there's one of three stereotypes that can be applied to singleness, especially in church world. That if you're single, maybe in your 30s, then either these can be stereotypes. You are socially deficient, emotionally isolated, or infinitely available. One of those three things. Like if you're single, man, then you would sign you up for anything because you're single. And these are stereotypes that I think can develop. They're just not biblical. And want to just think through those from a biblical standpoint. Socially deficient. We're going to be in 1 Corinthians 9 in 2 weeks. But in 1 Corinthians 9, Paul brings up, I'll just read it. In chapter 9, verse 3, he says, My defense to those who examine me is this. Do we not have a right to eat and drink? He's talking about him and Barnabas.
Yep.
Do we not have a right to take along a believing wife, even as the rest of the apostles and the brothers of the Lord and Cephas?
Yeah.
So what he implies in 1 Corinthians 9 is that the other apostles, including Cephas and the brothers of Jesus, are what? Married.
Right.
And then he says, Or do only Barnabas and I not have a right to refrain from marriage and working? So there's at least 3 people who we can look at in Scripture that were single, and that would be Paul, Barnabas, and Jesus.
Yeah.
Socially deficient? No. Perhaps it wasn't that they were single because they were socially deficient. It was because they actually had a greater focus. Yeah. And that's the whole thing that Paul is making in chapter 7. Yeah. It wasn't any sort of deficiency. It was focus.
That's right.
In terms of emotionally isolated, I do think this goes back to some of what you're saying in Genesis 1 and 2, that marriage wasn't the only gift when he says it's not good for man to be alone. And so God gives Eve to Adam. He gives a relationship, and not just marriage.
That's right.
I started to think, okay, where do we see in Scripture that singleness doesn't mean emotional isolation? And I started to think about David and Jonathan. Mm-hmm. Now, at least David is married, kinda,
right?
In 1 Samuel 18. But this is what 1 Samuel 18 says. It says, as soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Mm-hmm. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house, like he wouldn't let David go home. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. So David's married, but two guys in a deep friendship. I didn't read anything about emotional isolation there. There's deep fellowship. There's like you used the word, I think, koinonia earlier. Single did not mean emotionally isolated for them.
That's right.
And singleness doesn't mean that scripturally. So not socially deficient, not emotionally isolated, and not infinitely available.
Right.
Again, I started just trying to think biblically about singleness. There's a lot of times in the New Testament that Paul's single, that he goes, dude, I'd love to come see you, but I can't. Yep. Like there's something I'm booked. Because he was single doesn't mean he was infinitely available.
Right.
And so as we're thinking about singleness, the reason I think that these matter is because I think singleness can be thought of if you're a single person in the church and it just feels like, it feels like everybody's married. That singles can tend to think that think of themselves or think that they are viewed as second tier.
Yeah.
And I think far from it. Singleness is not a problem to be fixed.
Right.
It's a context, a gift to bloom in.
Yeah.
And that was helpful for me to think some of these stereotypes that Scripture would be like, no, that's not true.
And I think one more, and I don't know if it's one more or kind of a riff on one you've already, with the emotional isolation, but I think one of the low-hanging fruit is that society looks at someone who's single. Sometimes, beyond the church, as culturally, we can find security in the fact that someone loves me, right? Like even the old song, "You're nobody till somebody loves you," right? There's this idea like I want to be desirable, and if I'm not with somebody, if I'm not in a romantic partnership, relationship, marriage, whatever, that somehow I'm undesirable or I'm less than. And if I've got a guy or a girl, then okay, now I matter. I'm kind of playing the game. I'm an adult even, and so people can subtly and wrongly look down on single people as somehow kind of needing to take this step of maturity almost.
Right.
And if you're single, then you're just, basically just wanting to just kind of live carefree and whatever. And no, there's many wonderful, like you said, these were not those Paul, this is good company, Jesus and Barnabas. So I think to look down on people or it's easy to think, okay, I can just find some security socially and companionship. But that's why I think that it's not good for men to be alone doesn't just apply to marriages, because there are many marriages in which the people are very alone. And there are many singles who are very well connected and have rich, satisfying relationships and do not feel that loneliness. And so it is better to be single and hopeful than married and hopeless.
What would you say to a person who's single, wanting to bloom where they're planted, and yet also going, I don't want to be married. How would you coach them? How would you pastor that person?
Yeah. God has given you other things. He's given you other relationships, other gifts to use. And so my counseling coach would be, Tommy Nelson uses the illustration of a race, and you're running in a lane. And a lot of guys decide, okay, I'm tired of running alone. And they run into the infield and they kind of drag a girl out there try to get them onto their end and synchronize them to them. But that life pattern wasn't native to that girl, to that woman. And so he says, just run in the direction God gave you. Use your gifts. Love your people. Do what God gave you to do. Do the next good thing, as Elizabeth Elliot would say. And eventually, if it's God's will, the person that is designed for you will be running next to you in the lane there, and that you can link arms and run that same direction together. And so my counsel would be, don't put life on pause. Don't not do what you're called to do. Don't wait to go into missions. Don't wait to move here. Don't wait to whatever because you're hoping to get married and then go do it. Go do what God's called you to do, and then wait. And when God's time is right, He'll bring. That's what He did. He brought Eve to Adam, and He woke Adam up when the time was right, and there they were. And so I just think when God's timing is right, He'll bring her to you. Keep going. Keep doing what God called you to do.
Right. I was thinking about that question as well, and what I would want to say. And, there's always, situational nuances. And so you're always hesitant to give advice when you don't have the details of what's going on. But regardless, anytime there's something going on and you're just like, God, I'd love for this to change.
Right.
Where do you go from there? And first thing, I think three thoughts come to my mind. They're general principles, but specifically regarding singleness. If you'd like to be married, I think Psalm 84, verse 11, it says, no good thing does He withhold from those who walk uprightly. No good thing does He withhold from those who walk uprightly. So I would say if you're single and you really want to be married, I would start with gratitude to the Lord and say, thank you for the gift that He has given you up to this point. The language of our faith is thanksgiving. Yeah. And so why say thank you for to keep you going back to the analogy of bloom where you're planted, right. Why say thank you for being planted in the pot called singleness?
Right.
And it's always going to come back to, well, I can give thanks depending on what I believe about God.
Right.
Is He sovereign? And is He a good Father?
Right.
If He is, then, Jesus says in when He's instructing His disciples to pray, how many of you, when your son asks for a loaf of bread, will He give him a stone?
Right.
And then He finishes it with this point. He says, if you then being evil know how to give what is good to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven, who knows what you need, give what is good to those who ask? Yep. So God promises to give what is good to those who ask. Now, His metrics for good might not always be what my metrics for good are, but if I believe that He's a good Father and I believe that He gives what is good to those who ask, then I have good reason to say thank you for what He gives. Yeah. It's a matter of trust.
And and trust, I think, is a big word, because it might be an issue of, I can tell this is, but oftentimes it's going to be in hindsight. So when I was in my early 20s, I was living in Russia. I came back for my mid-20s to seminary, had a dating relationship, thought that was going to be the one. It was not, did not pan out. So at 28, I'm at a decision. Do I go back to Russia? And I'm just thinking, man, single. And so I did. So I said, okay, this is what God's called me to do. Tell me nothing, do what God's called you to do. And the summer that I'm turning 29, I'm literally moving back to Russia, single man, thinking, okay, this is it, And later that summer, I re-met some a woman I had known before who now is my wife of 25 years, right? But I met her back in Russia, and what if I would have said, I'm going to wait until I don't want to go back alone. I want to go back as a family. And so, while that may be a pretty crazy example, it's my life, and I just would encourage everyone to keep going. Just keep doing what God's called you to do. Even if I didn't feel like going back alone, I think, I've got the gift of singlehood. I just feel like I want to do this alone. That was not it. But I said, but God, you've called me, and I'm going to believe, and we're going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I ended up meeting. Now, maybe I wouldn't have. Others go back and they don't. I can't answer for that life. I can't answer for mine. But I think God knows where we are. And in fact, when I re-met her, she had moved out to Siberia as a 26-year-old single woman, and because Moscow was like, the comfort zone, and people were like, "Don't you want to get married?" And probably to an American, in Siberia. And she was just like, "God knows where I am. He can find me. God can find me." And so she flew into town. Which was a 6-hour flight. It was 6 time zones east of Moscow. She had 12 hours in town, and that night she was training out with her team to a different city. And during that 12 hours, I ran into her on the street. That's how we reconnected. And, if anyone can say, the Lord knows where I am, he can find me. We had to meet on this 200 meters of sidewalk. Like, I was coming into a building, she was coming out. We had about 3 or 4 minutes. We had to overlap between the bus stop and the building. And we were the only 2 people on that stretch of sidewalk in that moment. And God just said, now's the time. And so it might have worked out differently. There are other people that they go back, they move to Siberia, and they remain single. And so, but God knows. He knows what is His good gift for you.
So if you're single, going, this is not the gift that I want.
Right.
How do I process this? By faith, say, thank you, Lord. Believe that you give what is good to those who ask. And that Romans 8:28 is a promise that becomes cliche, but it is true that God works all things for the good of those who love Him and who are called according to His purpose. And that good thing that He works out is to be conformed into the image of His Son.
That's right.
So am I saying that God is using your current situation, and in this case, singleness, to conform you? Well, that's exactly what He's intending to do. Yeah, I am saying that.
That's right.
And that's a good thing. So thank you, Lord. He may be pruning you.
Yeah.
He may be using you, like you guys were used in your own ministries in Moscow.
Yep.
He may be saving you for some future person.
Yep.
And so I don't know how God's doing it, but
Yeah.
I do think that we have good reason in the character of God to be able to say thank you in all things.
I feel like you have to play offense and defense here, because that is the lie. And it's so easy to get drawn into, like, I really need somebody. No, we really need is to be conformed to the image of Christ. That's what we need. And God knows the best pathway for each of us to do that. And so if this is the path He has given us, this is the one that is right for us.
So single, but I want to be married, by faith, say thank you. Second, I would also say, if you want to be married, it's okay to put yourself out there to find a spouse. I think there can be a little bit of a, like, man, if I take initiative, then that's not really trusting God. I'm kind of, letting God bring the person to me, and and to take initiative would be kind of taking matters in my own hands, kind of
Right.
an Abram and Tamar situation.
Right.
Hagar.
Yeah.
Tamar?
Hagar.
Hagar.
Yeah.
Thank you. But I think it's okay to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
And to connect in groups. Dating apps, you got to use them with a brain. But that is the way a lot of people have actually found, like, the person they're dating and actually that they get married to.
Yeah.
And if there's a stigma around that, whatever. I think we can use the tools with a brain.
Right.
And that doesn't reflect a lack of faith. So, single, want to be married? Say, thank you, Lord, because He is a good vine dresser. He's a good Father.
Right.
Take initiative. And then one more, and you can jump into it, is to continue. This is what Tommy Nelson said. This is what 1 Corinthians 7 says, is to leverage your capacity to advance the kingdom.
Yeah.
No, you're single. That doesn't mean you have infinite availability. You have some availability.
Right.
And to leverage your capacity to advance the kingdom. And there is unique capacity for that. I've talked before about Dr. Cooper, and Dr. Cooper was the director of the Bible teaching program at CIU. A single woman her whole life. And, well, she's still alive. And she chose to leverage her capacity to advance the kingdom, and she invested herself in students in the way that a lot of professors could not do, given their life situation, marriage, kids, those sorts of things. She would have us over to her house for dinner. She would come to games. She would, when Sweet D and I were dating, she would actually like initiate with Sweet D at CIU. She would find out about how Sweet D is doing. And she is an inspiration to me. And she has chosen her whole life. Now she's retired, but she's still teaching. Has chosen to leverage her capacity to advance the gospel. So if you're single and in your heart you'd love to be married, say thank you. You can take initiative and keep. It's everything you're saying. Keep using your capacity, leveraging that towards doing what God has put in front of you today.
There's a phrase, and I think it came from Andy Stanley, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's basically become the person you're looking for is looking for, right? And so if you're looking for a kind of person, I would just encourage you just to keep being that person, and to keep becoming who you want to be and who you want to be with. And if God brings that person along, fantastic. And if not, you got to enjoy being that person you want to be. And so I do hope that if for you, that if for those who are single and want to be married, then do what you can, but also do what you can to be content now, because that contentedness that you have now as a single person, some people ask me, how do I know when I'm ready to get married? That I don't know, but I do know this, that people who are discontent in singlehood struggle with contentment in marriage, and I'm not saying you have to be like, okay, now I'm fine with my singlehood, now God send me my wife, I just... Not give to get, but do your best to truly find satisfaction in God and in the people around you, in this good life that God's given us. And yes, that gnawing may be there, that hunger may be there, and that may be God's way of bringing you to your spouse. Ultimately, it may not be. Again, God knows your path, but like you say, use wisdom, do what you can, and don't put ultimate meaning in it, either singlehood or marriage. Because both of them are temporary, both of them are passing, and all of us will be united with Christ ultimately. So, and even the people who are married now will one day, unless they perish together, which is the exception, will be single again. And so I do think that a more robust culture of koinonia, of fellowship in the church, would be a help to our single people, especially, who have to do more work to create that. So my challenge to the married people is lift up your eyes and see your single brothers and sisters, not just as single, but as humans and as men and women gifted for fellowship, for outreach, and for many beautiful and wonderful things. And cultivate those relationships beyond your marriage and beyond your family.
Yeah. When Sweet D and I started at Sandhurst, that was 2013. We had just gotten married, and I think we found it hard to connect at Sandhurst. Probably for a couple of reasons. One, everything was new. New city, new job, new marriage. We had been married a week.
Yeah.
But I also think that once we had kids, then it just kind of seemed like a new world opened up to us in community at Sandhurst.
Right.
And so I think if you're married with kids at Sandhurst, it's pretty easy to find a home. Married without kids, a little harder to find a home. Single at Sandhurst, really much more difficult to find a home. And so we speak to this a little bit in terms of you're over groups at Sandhurst.
Yeah.
And if you were going to give a word to our church to help our church be a place where it's not just a place for married with kids, it's a place where if you're single, maybe you can find a home here. How would you? What words would you say to our church generally, either maybe to the marrieds or to singles? What would you say?
I think the one thought I would have is to make sure you cross sort of like train in terms of your fellowship, right? So find a group that are the people like you. It's easy to connect. If you're married with children, find married with children. If you're single, jump in on the singles group, whatever. I mean, find people that it's easy to connect with, but cross train too, and be in something that's not like you. So don't just relate to married with children. Relate to singles and to prime timers and to college kids, and find a group to be a part of. Life groups are especially good at being cross generational and single, married, sort of a good microcosm of the church at large. Make sure, and which initially is harder to get over those. When people are at a different life stage than you, it's harder to develop those bonds, but they can also be very enduring and richer if you take that time to develop those. So yes, find something that's easy for you to connect to, but also find folks who are different from you in life stage, life season, and connect there, whether it's a core group or a life group or a fellowship group, however that works.
All right. So let's say I've tried that. I've tried the life group thing.
Yep.
We're coming to the end of the semester.
Yep.
Yeah. Didn't work.
Yep. Call me, write me, and let's talk, because I don't, let's not give up, and you're not stuck. So maybe it's the group, maybe it's the type of group, and every life has multi-layers to it. And there's a social, a spiritual, an emotional, a financial, a physical. There's just lots of layers to life. And let's keep trying. Let's find something that will work. And if we don't have it, let's make it. Let's create it. Let's start it.
I totally agree with everything you're saying. And I think, being in youth ministry for 11 years, I loved it and I believe in it. I think what a difficult byproduct of it is when you grow up in all these age kind of segmented ministries, you go through, in youth ministry, you're in a small group, and if you have somebody 2 years older than you in your small group, it's like, whoa, like that's kind of weird.
Like a different life.
You definitely don't have a girl in your small group, And so then you graduate, and then if you have somebody in your life group within 2 years of you, that's weirdly close in proximity. Yeah. And so there's a shift that you got to make in terms of plugging into the life of the body when things are different than how they've been the last 18 years. Yeah. So I will say to our students who are growing closer to graduation, when you graduate, then it's going to take work, but I really do want to encourage you guys to take ownership for your role in your church and to push through the awkward, join a life group, get plugged in with adults. And it's hard, but but it is worth it.
Make the effort. And one common complaint I've heard, but concern, whatever, is and not just from singles, but from everyone, is that I've tried and I went, like you say, it didn't work. I tried to break into that group. I bounced off. There's cliques, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, I get it. There's reasons why circles are around the way they are. One thing that C.S. Lewis did was he gave us this definition of friendship in 2 words: you two. You connect over your passions. So it's not like, oh, you're single like me and your 30s like me. It's like, oh, you like, Captain America or Star Wars or pickleball or whatever is your thing, and that you connect with people who share your interests. So whether you're married or single, I would really encourage you to pursue connections with people who share your interests as well, and form those bonds that way, because you already now have a natural passion that's shared. You too. Okay, wow. And now we have something to talk about. Lewis, of course, met Tolkien, and their shared passion was Icelandic poetry in Icelandic. Not my thing, but for them it was great. So what's your thing? And find people who love your thing and pursue that. See what happens.
Agreed. Our last question. And by the way, if anybody ever has questions related to the sermon, just send them in to hello@sandhurst.net, and we'll try to answer them. We're doing podcasts. We're filming on Monday, so you got to get them in before Monday.
Yep.
But it really was impactful to me to think, okay, the topic of 1 Corinthians 7 is marriage, divorce, singleness. That's the topic. But the goal that everything he's working towards is to secure undistracted devotion to the Lord. And I put a fair amount of thought into the things that stand in the way of me and undistracted devotion to the Lord. I want to give some thoughts to that and see what you think. What stands in the way between me and undistracted devotion to the Lord? three things came to my mind. One is an overly sensationalized view of full devotion. What I mean by that is when we think, okay, I want to secure undistracted devotion to the Lord. Full devotion to the Lord would mean, okay, sell everything, move to Siberia, and don't go out to eat, give that money to missions, like that would be full devotion to the Lord. And I think sometimes that full devotion to the Lord, that what would stand in the way between me and full devotion to the Lord is this over sensationalized view of that's what that would mean, and not much biblical sort of context for what does it really mean biblically. And I don't want to lower the bar lower than what Jesus does and what the New Testament does, and basically make the Christian life this kind of American Christianity. But I do want to balance like an overly sensationalized view of full devotion to the Lord with 1 Thessalonians 4.
Yeah, while you're turning there, I was talking to a guy yesterday who said, I want to love God, and I'm not sure I do or I can. I mean, I see people in church and they're raising their hands and doing all this stuff, and I was like, I just don't know if I can ever be like that. And I was like, brother, you have no idea if that person was really worshiping or not. They look like they are, but that is not the picture of devotion. That's their picture of devotion, but yours may be totally different. And so I do think stereotypes work against us in this way.
Yeah. And there is a danger there. Like, I don't want to go like all postmodern where it's like, well, what does devotion look like to you? Because there are different flavors of it, but
Right.
God has given us a portrait of it, and devotion looks like this and does not look like this.
Right.
But then the freedom inside that. Here's one passage, 1 Thessalonians 4. And make it your ambition to lead a quiet life and attend to your own business. Okay, stay in your lane and work with your hands just as we commanded you, so that you will behave properly toward outsiders and not be in any need. Now, there's a specific context to this, but this verse helps balance out a little bit of the overly sensationalized, sell everything, and if you're buying Starbucks, then clearly you are a hedonist who needs to repent, because that money could be spent somewhere else. So I think that stands in the way, and what I need is just a biblical view of the Christian life. And that's why I think I go back to this purpose statement, or a way of articulating the purpose of the Christian life so much, that love and obey God.
Yeah.
This is my calling. Jesus was really clear. There's one command on which all of the Old Testament law hang on. This one thing: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength.
That's right.
Okay, and love God. And Jesus said, "If you love me, you'll do what?
You'll obey me."
Obey me.
Yeah.
To love and obey Him by His power, for His glory, and help others do the same. Like this is what God has called me to, and so I want to, in wherever I'm planted, whatever pot that is, whether it's married with kids, whether it's singleness, whether it's divorced, whether it's a student, to say, I want to live my life loving God and obeying Him under the authority of His word, and I'm going to help others do the same. Yeah. I heard somebody say one time, and this really helped me, that the best way to grow in your faith is to help somebody else grow in theirs, and that doesn't need to be an overly sensationalized sort of thing, just a discipleship priorities, truth, relationship, opportunity, accountability, in normal life. That's, I think, a biblical view of full devotion to the Lord. So what stands in my way? An overly sensationalized view of full devotion. A second is love of self. And the third is just kind of a cheap view of God. These are things that stand in the way. If I love me and just think about the big I in the service, then a lot of things are going to flow out of that flow against full devotion to the Lord. Fear of man flows out of love of self. If I love me, I need to protect the perception that I want you to have of me. Yeah. If I love me, then I'm going to be fearful of unknowns, because I need to be able to control things. And I think that flows against full devotion to the Lord. Yeah. Love of self, and then a ho-hum view of God. Just look, time and time again, anytime somebody just goes full send into full devotion to the Lord, it's not usually with a hype speech. It's usually paired with, wow, I see God in a way that I have not before. Whether it's Isaiah 6, when Isaiah gets a view of the throne, or Peter catching a bunch of fish in Luke 5, and he's like, "Depart from me, I'm a sinful man," or the demoniac, and his story really ties a couple things together for me when he's delivered from his demonic oppression, and he says to Jesus, "Hey, Jesus, put me in the game. Like, I want to come with you.
Yep.
I want to change the world, sell everything, that kind of thing."
Yep.
And Jesus's words to him are,
Go home.
"Go home." Like, bro, you want to change the world? Sweet. You see me rightly. That is a right desire. Full devotion to the Lord. But here's how I want to channel that full devotion to the Lord. Go home.
Yep.
Tell your people what happened.
Yeah.
And you know what he does? He goes home and he tells the people what happened.
Yep.
Not overly sensational, just obedient to the calling that came out of, wow, look at the deliverance that you have for me. So those are some thoughts that I've tried to work through as I've tried to consider what stands between me and full devotion to the Lord.
But when you were talking, what came to my mind was honestly just the story of my mom, her journey. She is now 82, and she early on she was the first person in her extended family to go to college. She went to Vanderbilt. She got married to my dad. He became a physician, and they started this beautiful life together. They were married for around 10 years. And my dad left our family, and she lost her husband. And in the next few years, in her early to mid-30s, she lost both of her parents. And in her late 30s, she lost her health. She became wheelchair-bound with MS. So she had lost, and she was an only child. So she lost her parents, and as an only child, she lost her husband, she lost her health, and she had other losses that I'll leave out. And I'm just thinking, if anyone had reason to be bitter, she was it. And to this day, she's just one of the most cheerful people you'll ever meet. And she is still reaching out to people. She still believes in the Lord. She still seeks fellowship. She still, she'll tell me stories when I call about talking to different people in the independent living home about Jesus, and how she's reading to this person who's just lost their sight, but she can read the Bible to them, and how she just sees herself remaining on mission. And I just think, how does someone go through all that and just remain just genuinely joyful and cheerful? And I realize, by God's doing, she just lived what we're talking about. She said, "You know what, Lord? Actually, it wasn't an inheritance. It wasn't a big family. It wasn't a husband. It wasn't the picture, the magazine cover life. That wasn't what you had for me. But what you did have for me, I have embraced. And what God did provide was a church family and koinonia for her, and a sense of, I'm on this planet for a reason. She understood her calling was to love God and people, and she has done it faithfully for 50 years since her divorce. And I look at that and I go, man, she's going to be at the front of the line."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people who have been inspired to love and obey God towards full, undistracted devotion to the Lord just by hearing her story through you. So bloom where you're planted.
That's right.
1 Corinthians 7. All right. Well, thanks for joining, everyone. We've got 1 Corinthians 8 coming up, and very excited about that. Paul is going to bring up a blood-boiling issue for the Corinthian church in chapter 8. So excited to look at that, and we're going to look at the things that are similar things that are the blood boilers socially for us today. So that's chapter 8, and looking forward to it. Thanks for joining.
You bet.